with Uganda and with all of the good things that are going on here. I know it's a challenging environment, but I'm always inspired when I spend time here. I'm really pleased to be sharing this topic with one of my close colleagues, Professor Cherly A.Moyer. Cherly A.Moyer is in our medical school where she does a lot of research on maternal child health issues. She's trained in public health, and when we started off together, we were a mentor-mentee. So now we're colleagues and we mentor each other. But we've shared the journey in mentorship, so we're going to be sharing this talk. And as you can see, I'm an education dean. And for the most part, back at University of Michigan, we've really let go of lectures. We find that just a lecture for an hour, hour and a half, people fall asleep. So we're going to have kind of a mixed discussion here. Give you some information, and then talk and give you some information. So you'll find that I'm going to try and ask you to interact. Raise your hands, participate, ask questions, argue with us. We would be most honored. So thank you for what I think is a very important topic, establishing a culture of mentorship. So first question, where I want you to raise your hands. How many of you have been to the state of Michigan? Okay, we have a few people. All right, so first I have to introduce to you where we come from. So this is Michigan. All right, we're kind of in the middle of the United States, up on the border with Canada. So if you notice there, we're surrounded by lakes. We're called the Great Lakes State. Kind of that big one at the top is Lake Superior. It's always compared to Lake Victoria. You know, it's always an argument. Which lake is bigger, which lake has more water? But we're a Great Lakes state. So much of our culture is going to the water, enjoying the water. We have nice beaches, we have lighthouses here, but it doesn't look like this right now. We're heading into winter, and we're so happy to be here because we just left snow. You know, it's been snowing heavily in Michigan. Pretty soon, the lakes freeze. And the lighthouses you see here, that same lighthouse looks like this. It's covered nice. All right, so our water gets hard and we can walk on it. So it's always nice any time of year, but particularly this time of year, to be in Uganda. So where are we in Michigan? We're at the University of Michigan. It's kind of a small town. This is Ann Arbor, is our town. And it's a mixture of school buildings and city. And it's a big campus, one of the biggest campuses in the United States. So we kind of do these things that McArary does, that we balance research and education and healthcare. We're in the business of new knowledge. And at Michigan, we're the top public research university in the U.S. You probably know the U.S. has private and public schools. The private schools are places like Hopkins, Stanford, Duke, Harvard. They're private schools. But ours is the largest public school, the biggest research university. Lots of research programs, lots of graduate programs, and a strong culture of intercollaboration. We also are famous for having the first teaching hospital. You know, back in the 1800s, people weren't going into a hospital. Hospitals didn't exist, really. But we formed the first teaching hospital in the United States, so it was kind of a classroom where the students and people could come. So that's kind of my world, and I wanted you to know a little bit about it. So now, I'm going to give you a chance to exercise your arms a little bit, all right? How many of you are students? Nice, all right. How many of you are graduate students, what we would call residents? Trainees, all right. How many of you are faculty? Good. Lots of faculty. How many of you are researchers? Nice. clinicians. I'm there to take care of patients. That's my main job. That's my only job. Ah, okay. Very nice. Now I'm going to ask you tougher questions. How many of you have heard a lecture or a seminar on mentorship before? 40% of the room. Good. Okay. So we're going to keep in mind we need to teach something to the people who have already heard something, but those of you who have never heard of talk on it, we need to introduce the talk. How many of you would say you mentor somebody? You're a mentor to somebody. All right. How many of you would say you have a mentor? All right. So 2/3 of the room. How many of you who have a mentor have more than one mentor? Oh, just a few. All right. So our goal from this lecture, when somebody asks you questions like this, you can raise your hand to all the questions. All right. But also you have more than one mentor, and that you are familiar with making a culture of mentorship happen. So what Professor Moyer and I will be talking about is what is mentorship? How do you provide it? But especially, how do you get it? And then making mentorship happen in your own culture. Professor Moyer and I will be talking about things kind of from the U.S. culture, but we both have spent a lot of time in Africa. Big fans, big collaborators in Africa, so we'll be sharing some of our views. So, how many of you know what a role play is? Do you know what a role play is? Education Dean here. How many of you know what a role play is? Just a couple. All right. So, in the United States, this is a teaching device. All right. So we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to do a pretend skit. All right? So I'm going to be a mentor, and Professor Moyer is going to pretend she's a senior student. And we're going to get into a role and do a little example of mentorship. And then you're going to talk about it. Okay? Okay. Come in.
Hi, Prof. Kolars. Prof. Kusunji said I should come see you.
Oh, Prof is a good friend of mine. Sit down. What is it you want?
I don't know. Prof. Kusunji just said you're a really good mentor and I should come see you.
Okay. Well, what do you need a mentor for?
I don't know. She just said you were a good mentor and I need a mentor.
Are you willing to work hard? Are you committed to being a top researcher? Do you want to be the best? I don't have time to spend time with people who are not committed.
I'm committed.
What is it you're interested in?
Oh, I forgot to tell you who I am. I'm Cherly A.Moyer, and I'm a medical student, and I really like babies. And I wrote my honors thesis on babies. I was thinking you could read this, and then maybe help me get it published.
You know I'm a gastroenterologist, right? This isn't the kind of work that will get you anywhere. Whoever put these notions in your head? If you really want to get anywhere, you should be working on liver cancer. But I'm still not convinced you're committed to working hard and looking at yourself.
I'm sorry!
Okay, that was a role play. How many of you know what a role play is? Oh, come on, people. All right. Thank you, Professor Moyer. All right. Now, Professor Moyer and I are going to be up here, and we want to know, what did you observe? These kind of mentoring relationships happen all the time in the United States. I don't know if they happen here. All right? But what just happened? What was the potential mentor doing wrong or could have done better? What about the student? Could student Moyer have done anything better? Now, I wanted you to turn to the person next to you and discuss this for a minute. All right? Turn to each other and share your own views with each other. So what just happened there for an educator? This is what we call a buzz moment. Because Cheryl and I could hear the room buzzing. People were talking. So what did you say to each other? What did you hear somebody else say? So, is there anything the mentor could be doing better? Please, please.
So, my colleague here mentioned that we saw people pretending to be a mentor. But in the discussion, we thought that this is a situation where the mentor was not prepared to receive a mentee, and neither was the mentee ready to meet a mentor. So it was some kind of abrupt interaction that was not planned for.
I love that term, abrupt interaction. So lack of preparation, good observation. Other observations? Please.
My neighbors discussed and said that we saw something which commonly happens. One example is the mentee not knowing what exactly she wants, and the mentor expects that by the time you go, you figure it out and you know what you want. Yet many times that's the reason you need the mentorship. You're trying to figure out and put things into perspective.
Boy, great observation. Not knowing what was going on there, what was the mentee wanting, what was the mentor doing, and it didn't seem to come clear until the end. Please.
Can we just ask for you to introduce yourself and your position as well before you speak? That would be helpful for us to know who all is at.
Please, sir.
What I observed is there is a powerful mentor. He is kind of very high profile person who is facing someone maybe less experienced or very weak. The relationship is not like a very good bound. There's a distance between the two people. So it's kind of barrier between them. It's kind of a good relationship.
I was playing the big man, big powerful man, making sure everyone knew I was the big man. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Haruna Mungi, lecturer at the Physiology. I won't repeat what others said, but what I can add is that the mentor created an environment whereby the mentee was very timid and quite fearful in expressing what they wanted. And the mentor also tried to direct the mentee into his field of specialization. So not a friendly environment for somebody to put their best foot forward. And also, was I listening to what the student was wanting? Or was I imposing my own image on her? Well, if you really wanted me to mentor, you want to be like me. So, good. Maybe one more comment? Please.
My name is Jonathan Kalbo, a medical student. What me and my neighbor discussed was that the environment that mentor gave the mentee was not conducive in a way that the way he was speaking was kind of, hurry up, I want to do something. So we need to make the mentee comfortable to express herself to you.
Good. Excellent. Well, these are great points, and we're going to try and bring these out now in our presentation. And kind of circling back, and please.
I'd just like to get a couple of you to comment on what you thought the mentee did wrong. Any comments on that? Yeah.
So I saw the mentee with a huge folder, probably the page on one page is what I want to do, probably.
Anything else?
Associate project staff, members for public health.
I think the mentee should really be prepared to pitch their interest in 2 minutes. Because normally professors are always so busy. This is what happens so quite often. So you should be able to express yourself and not to make within 2 minutes.
And then I'll enjoy it. Yeah.
This is Cherly. I think age difference was beyond the she needs to know, so it's important to know who the mentor is and why you're going to them, why you chosen them.
Excellent. Those were exactly the comments I were hoping we would get out of that.
Sophisticated audience, so thank you, thank you. So that's right. So a couple of things that we want to do, again, since many of you haven't heard a talk on mentorship, we want to start with some basics. What is it? Because a lot of people go into mentorship and act the way they were mentored. So that kind of dynamic was a very common way that I was mentored when I was more junior. So I'm most likely, unless somebody's taught me how to be a mentor, I'm most likely to act like that, because that's the way I was mentored. I'm pretty good. I'm a senior associate dean. So that's how I was mentored. That's the way I'll mentor you. Similarly, usually people don't take the time to teach somebody how to be a good mentee. We think it's all about the push from the mentor, but there's a strong pull from the mentee. So our goals are to try and talk about that. I'm going to talk about it from how we're trying to change our culture and what do we do with our faculty to try and get them doing something different. And then Professor Moyer is going to be talking about what do we do with our mentees and how do we try and make something different? How can we help our mentees get the mentorship they need? So first of all, what is mentorship? I always try and understand what it is when you heard a student Moyer say, you're a good mentor. What does that mean? So you heard me say, what is being a mentor to you? For some people, it's a role model, an advocate, a listener, a teacher, a counselor, a balancer. Now, these aren't mutually exclusive. They overlap. But if the two people don't have a vision or a shared reality about what are you looking for? Are you looking for just advice on a next decision? Is that what you mean? Or are you looking for somebody to help shape your future? So I think it's vitally important to understand terms and to really clarify, are we talking about the same thing? Or are we talking about something different? You know, the actual word mentor has its Greek origins. So it goes back centuries. But a working definition that we use with our faculty is a mentor is someone of advanced rank or experience who guides, teaches, and develops a more junior colleague. So it can have those elements of the previous page. But it's trying to establish that environment where somebody is trying to be helpful. This is a kind of an old tradition, an old definition. I think a very important part of the definition nowadays is what mentors learn from their mentees. So I've learned a lot from my mentee, Professor Moyer. So mentorship is more than skill acquisition, completing a project, or navigating a decision point. You may need help with that, but then you should be clear about that. And the mentor needs to understand, what are you looking for here? You trying to learn how to do colonoscopy better? Are you trying to figure out the technicalities of completing a project? Or do you have a decision in front of you? A lot of those are point-in-time advice. But mentorship is really trying trying to help people develop. You're trying to develop the whole person. I'm not just interested in that one aspect of you, but how can I help lift you up to do your best? And we should all be thinking, think to yourself, how many people around you are helping to lift you up? Versus how many people are not paying attention or trying to keep you down. So we have those issues in our culture. I don't know what they're like here, but we have those in our culture where but we try and give people mentorship awards explicitly, not because they're the big man or the big woman in our culture, or they've done the best research, but have they been the best at lifting other people up? So often when I'm doing mentorship or teaching mentorship, I'm also trying to use analogies and pictures. So here's a picture and an analogy that I often use. So mentorship for me is helping somebody get to their mountaintop. And often it's helping people identify their mountaintop. People like me are often putting more junior people on the spot saying, what's your mountaintop? When in reality, the mentee doesn't necessarily know their mountaintop yet. So it's helping them find their mountaintop. But also, look at the pathway up to the mountain. Is it a straight line? It's a zigzag, right? So often you're helping people along that path. You're not taking ownership necessarily of their whole journey of the mountain, but I can help you get from here to there. Now you've got expertise there, I'm helpful. I may not help you navigate the whole mountain, but I can help you navigate that point. So again, it comes down to what I was hearing from the feedback from the crowd, being clear about what that is. So how do you provide it? And most of you, I hope, see yourself as mentors. Even if you're a student, even if you're the youngest person in the room, you're probably mentoring a child, a sibling. You're trying to help somebody else up. Maybe their mountaintops are different than the people's mountains in here. But I find the most effective mentors. And sometimes we develop our evaluation tools so that we can see our teachers like this. The mentors are balancing 3 different dimensions. They're trying to be supportive, but they're also trying to challenge. And that's a tender balance. All right? A lot of us think we got to be tough on people, otherwise they're not going to grow. But most of us need some support, some nurturing. But we just don't need a hug. We want to be challenged. But we want to help share a vision of what the mentee can be. The most powerful mentorship I've had in my culture is when somebody else sees what I'm capable of and looks at me in one way or another and says, Joe, I can see what you can be. Now let's help get you there. But it can't be just a proscriptive, you should be doing liver cancer. Somebody has to take the time to know who I am before they can figure out what I can be. So how do you start the journey? How do you start to make good mentorship happen? First of all, I think of mentorship as explicit. It's not just, going off and assuming that what you've seen around you or what you had is the way it's done, but making it explicit. And how do you start the journey? So how do I start the journey as a mentor when I'm mentoring junior faculty or students or learning? I'm trying to figure out where the starting questions are for somebody. You've come to me, you've knocked on the door, you're sitting down in my office. What are the biggest questions you're wrestling with right now? And these usually come into 4 groups. You want to investigate being a mentee with me. Are your biggest questions why? Are your biggest questions what questions? Are they how questions or are they where questions? And I want to note, as faculty, we often falsely assume we know what the learners are looking for. If we're not careful, our psychological size, we can be very top-down. We dictate, and we're not listening. So some of the things I'm listening for, is it a why question? Somebody is interested in something, and they want to talk about that. Interested in being an obstetrician? Student Moyer, are you interested in research on babies? What is it? What's the why? The what is, are you struggling with what you want to become? I don't know if I want to be an internist or a surgeon. I don't know if I want to be primarily a researcher or a clinician. I don't know if I want to be at Makerere or if I want to be out in another place. Or are you wrestling with how questions? How do you get to your envisioned destination? So usually as faculty, we don't take enough time to help people understand their mountain, what they define as a mountaintop. We go right to the, all right, I know what you're looking for, and this is how you get there, and study liver cancer. And then the where follows that. But I spend most of my time when a faculty member or a student comes to me for mentorship trying to understand what are their questions. And then I spend most of my initial time prompting them with questions so I can understand what their starting point is on the journey. But I'm also trying to signal, I'm going to first listen to you, understand your situation, then I can be helpful. If I don't understand where you're at, I can't be helpful. So some of these are prompt questions from faculty to potential mentees. So a lot of time, people will be in my office and they don't really know what they need from me. They want advice, but they can't really articulate what kind of advice. So some of the questions I'll ask people to get them talking are saying, well, what are some of your current role models and why? As a student, is there somebody you've seen here at Makerere that's who you want to become? Or is there maybe two people? Yeah, I want to have this from her and this from him. But what are some of your role models and why? And then I'll also find, where do people get their energy? What are the day-to-day activities that you find most rewarding? So for some people it's really framing questions. Other people it's answering questions, designing research. Other people it's doing complex procedures on a patient or trying to help somebody get through a tough diagnosis or talk with family members. But where do you get your energy? So again, these are the types of things I'm trying to probe in our culture. When people are coming to me with specific mentoring questions, I'll kind of again ask some exploratory questions. Do you want to be primarily providing care, teaching, doing research? Because a lot of times a mentee doesn't know how to think about things. They're asking for us how to think about it. And faculty often leap over that point and they make assumptions that aren't necessarily tested. Sometimes I'll ask people, who do you want to be your main customers? Is it patients? Is it students? The general population? Who is it? And again, none of these have singular answers, but they prompt a good discussion so you can see how people start to rank order. Because depending on the answers here, my advice of trying to help them see their mountain and the switchbacks to get to the top are going to be completely different. Who do you like to work with? Who do you envision working with? A lot of people don't know. But how can you frame the possibilities and help them see what's possible? So now I'm going to show what are some of the desirable attributes in a mentor. You know, some people will turn these into evaluation forms. So we have some of our places where we evaluate mentors, not all of them. but they have to fill out evaluation forms, and it can be tricky, right? It's that power differential. But some of the desirable attributes, is a mentor goal-oriented, or are they just sitting there to listen and understand your complaints and try and help soothe you? Do they have some credibility? Do they have some special knowledge or expertise? Do they inspire you to be better? You know, they motivate you and say, boy, every time I spend time with her, every time I spend time, she wants me to be a better blank. Do they share aspects of their own personal journey? And sometimes, and people in our culture, they don't let people know what their journey was like as a mentee. You know, people like me always look like they were born this way. And they've always been at the top of the mountain looking down at others. Are they honest and thoughtful, trustworthy, promotes information management? But are they enabling the mentee to develop their own identity and promote independence? Or is my job to keep you in your place because you're doing work and help that helps me? So we have all different kinds of mentors on this scale at the University of Michigan. But I talk like this with them to try and get them into a better place. What are the ones that I think are particularly important for us? That when I talk with mentees and say, what was most helpful? It's the mentors who share aspects of their own journey. And they develop skills in time management. You know, time is the big gorilla in the room here. This sounds nice, Joe, but nobody has time. The mentors are too busy. I'm too busy. We're all too busy. So how do you make time and do just-in-time mentorship? And then again, trying to make yourself as a mentor obsolete. How can I help you grow into your role that there's nothing you need from me? So I think ultimately, a mentor wants to be thought of as a listener. All right? When I try and evaluate, I talk to my students or faculty to find out how things are going with their mentors. Are they a good listener or not? Do they understand where you're at, which switchback you're on, what's your mountain? Are they listening? And also, are they people that are helping you see who you can be? This is Love's Mirror. And it's at the University of Rochester, but helping see, or I love this picture. Have any of you had a student or somebody more junior who's really a cat, but they look in a mirror and they see a lion? All right. Some of us, you know, don't have a good view on ourselves. We don't see ourselves as who we are. We see ourselves as less or more. And it takes a trusted mentor to help us see ourselves. And to me, that's crucial for mentorship. I always like this picture. I try and work this in. So mistakes. It could be that the purpose of your life is only to serve as a warning to others, all right? One of the things I do to try and decrease my psychologic size, to increase the environment, is I'll share with people some of my struggles and the mistakes I've made. Because as somebody who's older, my main difference from a lot of people is I've had a chance to make more mistakes and learn from them. But a lot of times in the mentor-mentee dynamic, the pressure is hide your mistakes. Don't look weak. And we can only change that culture as mentors, as faculty ourselves. So some of the potential barriers and faculty pitfalls, these are the things that I see in my own faculty that we work on constantly. Faculty who are trying to recreate their own self-image. I want to grow a child that looks just like Joe Kolars. I'm excited about Joe Kolars, and I can help you become a Joe Kolars. Or they are parental. Or I want to be your best friend. Doesn't mean you can't be friendly, but most people need more than a best friend. Best friends or something else. Being a caregiver for trainees, a lot of times as clinicians, we get confused when we're taking care of somebody more junior. Are we treating them like our patients, like our children? Or being an academic supervisor? I'm just here to make sure you're passing your classes, you're just making it through the next hoop. Probably the biggest barrier in faculty pitfall, though, is what I would call, what happened here? Thank you. Mismanaging intimidation and hierarchy. I don't know if this guy here was trying to be intimidating, but he was. So it's not enough just to say, I'm not going to try to be intimidating. We have to work very hard not to be intimidating. And we have to be mindful that there's a hierarchy that's established, whether we want it or not. We have to be mindful of that and try and reduce that gap. So in the United States, we have a character. Does anyone know what kind of character this is? Cowboy. Good. All right. I don't know if there's an analogy in Uganda, but this is a cowboy. Kind of a tough, rugged individual. And the most common comment a mentee will hear from their faculty is a cowboy comment. You just need to decide what you want to do. That's a pretty common dynamic. Well, the mentee is going in their head. That's what I thought I was talking with you about, Dean Kolars. Help to figure out what I want to do. Well, you just need to decide what you want to do. So that's a very common dynamic that, again, in my environment, I'm trying to make explicit. So I have a last slide here before I turn it over to Professor Moyer and continue the conversation. But the last charge I would give to the faculty, again, we're all mentors here. So as mentors, we need to try and think, how is the person you're talking to thinking? All right, you can't just think for yourself, you need to say, how is student Moyer thinking? And how can you be mindful of the attitudes, perceptions among learners that often impede a productive mentoring relationship? So this is where mentees aren't their best. They're not as strong as we are. So what are some of those notions or attitudes that hold mentees back? I don't want to bother you. All right, so I'm not even going to make an appointment. I'm just going to try and catch you in the hall. I know how busy you are. I don't want to bother you. Or I don't want to seem uncertain. At least in our culture, people who are uncertain are thought of as being kind of weak, underdeveloped, immature. You're at Makerere, you should be certain about what you're doing. Well, at the University of Michigan, there's a lot of people who are uncertain, but our culture presses them to hide it, and hold it inside. And then, I sure would like to please you. You're a dean, you're a powerful person, you could be helpful to me. Boy, I sure would like to make you happy, Dean Kolars. So there's that dynamic. And then, I don't want to look like my values are different from yours. All right, how can I get advice from you, but I don't want to be a kind of have a different appetite than yours. So every time I'm in a mentor-mentee relationship, I believe these are active. So I have to be mindful of those and speak to them. Often, a mentee can't articulate these, but when you bring it up, they go, yeah. So our job is to try and help articulate those. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Professor Moyer for a little bit, and then I'm going to come back to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about this from the mentee side. So I have spent years working with so many mentees I can't even count, from all stages, from undergraduate, young trainees to junior faculty. And over the years, I have seen a few things work better than others. So I'm going to talk about some of these individual trainees and give you some anecdotes of things that have worked. And I think a big take-home message here is there is no magic solution or magic formula to having a solid mentorship relationship. What works for one pair may not work for another. What works for one trainee may not work for another. So this is a list of 8 things that I'm not going to read right this second because I'm going to go through each of them one by one. And the first may seem very, very obvious, but it's worth stating. If you are open to learning something new and open to understanding different ways of doing things, and you're genuinely enthusiastic about that, your mentor can feel that. So this is actually a picture of one of my students on the right, Kyle, in Ghana, and on the left is my son. Last summer I had the chance to take him to Ghana. He was 17, and he'd never seen one of these coconuts that you all see, right? And he's asking Kyle, what do you do with the coconut? And Kyle's explaining to him how you can stick a straw on the top and you can drink it, and then what do you do to get the coconut meat out? And Davis is asking all these questions, and I was so pleased to see how engaged he was, how enthusiastic he was, and that he had all these questions. And I thought, that's very similar to mentorship. And Kyle was patiently explaining how to do all of this. And whether this is me sitting in Joe's office saying, so how exactly do I frame a big NIH grant? Or whether it's Davis asking my student how to get the juice out of the coconut, it's the same concept. So thinking about genuinely being interested in what you're doing and being open to new ideas. So I don't know how many of you know Dr. Elizabeth Nansabuga. And if you don't know her, you should find her. She's here. She's in the Center for Population Studies. And she came to the University of Michigan, 2014, 2015, through this great program that is the University of Michigan African Presidential Scholars Program, UMAPS for short. Now, Joy here also came to the University of Michigan. Joy, can you raise your hand? Through the same program. And this is my little mentorship tip for the day. It's a program where African junior faculty can propose to come to the University of Michigan for somewhere between 4 and 6 months and do whatever they want, paid. The applications are due in the summer, I think. If you want more information, go talk to Elizabeth, go talk to Joy. It's a great opportunity to have a mentor and to be somewhere and focus your effort. The point, Elizabeth came to me, sat down in my office, and she said, I'm here for this period, I can't remember whether it was 4 or 6 months, and I want to write this paper and get it published. I want to write this paper and get it published. And I found this grant opportunity, and I think I'm eligible. I want to submit a grant. And I never have trainees come into my office with that amount of direction. But she was convinced, and honestly, I thought she was a little crazy. I was like, there's no way you're going to get all that done. But this is why you have to meet Elizabeth, because she did. And we met once a week, every week. She would come in with her rundown of what she'd done the week before, what she planned to do for the following week, all the while making steady progress. So goals, metrics, and accountability. She set goals for herself at the beginning. She had metrics of when she wanted to get things done by, and then our meetings were her accountability. And that was completely driven by her. I feel like I just sat there and responded to what she needed. Now, not every mentee is ready to do that, but the point is that can be a really helpful model. And what that led to is that led to us submitting a grant together that was funded to look at postnatal care in the Rakai district. This is a picture I took when we were down there a couple years ago, interviewing VHTs and mothers and midwives. And we have data that we're going to be talking about tomorrow morning together as we think through our future research. So another key thing for mentees that I find that is helpful as a mentor is feedback in between meetings. In between those meetings I had with Elizabeth, she would send me a little email saying, okay, I finished this, and just so you know, I'm moving on to this. I include this picture because this was one of my Fogarty Fellows last year. His name's Martin, and he's from northern Ghana. And someone had given me something in Michigan that Martin needed in northern Ghana. And as many of you know, there's this beautiful African Express where you find the next person traveling and you tuck it in their suitcase, and then when they get there, they find the next person going north and they tuck it in their suitcase. And the moment this envelope made it to Martin, he sent me this picture on WhatsApp. And it just, first of all, it just made me smile. But it also told me, oh, he got it, great. And whether it's an envelope that actually included his ATM card, so it was kind of important, or whether it's a small update, like this week we enrolled 200 pregnant women and next week we start the 3rd trimester follow-up, those types of in-between meetings tell me that my mentees are engaged and that they're thinking things through. And from a very practical standpoint, I have a lot of mentees. Sometimes it's kind of hard to keep track of projects and who's doing what. And maybe a month goes by and I haven't heard from someone. If I hear from them every week and in between meetings, they're fresh in my mind. So help your mentors help you by keeping you fresh in their mind. Because you may be so deep in your study that you remember every detail. Your mentor probably can't. So help them help you. So I love these pictures. This year I have a Fogarty Fellow, Amy Young, who's working with Prof. Peter Weiser at the School of Public Health, looking at under 5 deaths here in Kampala. And I think these pictures are so illustrative of the challenge of being a good mentee, because you have this dual role of focusing very intently on one baby step at a time and don't fall. At the same time, looking at the big picture of how are you going to get this done in the time frame that you have. How does this research project fit into the research literature, the trajectory, your mentor's interests, your own interests, your career path? And so I have already so enjoyed the process of thinking through the nitty-gritty steps. How are we going to implement a study that potentially includes verbal and social autopsy in the slums of Kampala? It's not an easy process, lots of little baby steps, while also thinking about how are we going to get this done in a year. So this next picture is a picture of 2 colleagues from Ghana. The woman on the right in red, her name is Evelyn Sakea. She was a Fogarty Fellow 2 years ago, I think. And before that, she came to the University of Michigan on a short scholarship. She had 6 weeks to take summer courses. Now, I don't know what summer courses are like here, but at the University of Michigan, they compress a whole semester down into maybe 3 weeks. So instead of a 1-hour class with homework, you have a 4-hour class. And 1 week worth of homework is supposed to get done in a night. So these classes are ridiculously busy. Most people who come wouldn't take more than 2. And Evelyn took 5. Now, of course, I thought she was insane, but she said, I'm only here for this amount of time. I'm leaving my family. I am going to make the most of this. And she successfully finished 5 classes that were intense statistical classes because she really wanted to improve her skill set. She went on to become a Fogarty Fellow, and she did work on female circumcision in rural northern Ghana, a tough topic. By the end of her fellowship, she had 1 paper published and another ready to submit, because she makes the most out of every single opportunity. And I think that's a trait that we all can benefit from. I mean, Joe introduced us as colleagues, but I will forever, he's always my mentor. So the opportunities he provides me, I try to make sure I make the absolute most of them. And so no matter what stage you're at, there's that opportunity to just see how much more juice you can squeeze from the fruit. So this is a picture of one of my trainees from the School of Public Health at the University of Michigan. Her name is Clara, and she was spending time in Kumasi, Ghana, collecting data on every single delivery at this government hospital. It was a study about birth asphyxia. So as you can imagine, collecting data on every single birth is not an easy thing. And it also involved the lying-in ward as well as the post-op C-sections. It involved navigating nurses who sometimes felt very protective of the data. I love her hand on the book. She's like, don't take my book. And Clara had to navigate how to get data in this environment. And apparently, not so long into it, one of the nurses stopped her and looked at her and said, aren't you done yet? Can't you just go home? I don't know how I would respond to that, but Clara apparently smiled her biggest smile and said, it's Prof. Ashura's study. She won't let me go until I finish. I'm sorry. And she went about her day. By the time I got there at the end of the summer, The nurses were chatting with her in Tree, the local language, making fun of her skirt, and they were having a great time, and she knew all their names. The point, some of us would have shrank in that first encounter and never gone back. And Clara was just positive and resilient. And that, as a mentee, you are going to hit hiccups. You're going to hit challenges. And if the first instinct is to slink back and ask your mentor how to help you, which Clara could have done and would have probably been okay, I could have tried to figure out something. But that positivity and resilience that you can cultivate for yourself can be helpful. Which gets to this next slide about creative problem solving. You can always turn to your mentor as your first line of defense. Okay, I encountered X, mentor, what should I do? And many times that is absolutely appropriate. However, there's often some creative problem solving that you can foster. So this is an example where my colleague, former student, and I were traveling to rural Ghana, and we'd gone to the market and we had a bunch of groceries, and I was getting ready to make groundnut stew, when we realized we didn't have a can opener. And she said, oh yeah, we do. And she gets out the knife and starts banging one can on top of the knife, tapping it around to open up the can. You've probably seen this before. I had never seen this before. And I just laughed. I couldn't stop laughing. I was like, that is brilliant. This is absolutely brilliant. And it's such a metaphor for the plan Bs that we often have to implement when plan A doesn't work. So thinking about some creative problem solving. This is my last slide with my mentees in it. The other thing I wanted to be sure to bring up, and generally Africans are so much better at this than Americans. So let me just say, I aspire to be more African in this regard. Thinking about all of these projects as long-term relationships. This is a picture of two former Fogarty Fellows, and they are meeting with Prof. Richard Adanu, who was at the time Dean of the School of Public Health at the University of Ghana. He has since gone on to spend time at WHO. I think he's in line for the vice provost or vice chancellor or something. This is a very important man. And yet he came to the University of Michigan as part of our fellowship for 2 weeks, and they had his ear and his eye for 2 weeks. And they became very close with him, and now they're in regular dialogue with this man who is very high up in the totem pole. But the point is, it's a long-term relationship. They still send him updates. I still send my mentors from 20 years ago updates on my life. I get updates from my previous mentees, and it's not that at that exact moment I need something from them or they need something from me. It's just keeping things moving, because you never know when someone might have a project and they need a person and you come to mind. Again, keeping you in the forefront of your mentors' minds can help. And again, not that it's always about an outcome, but I think it is important to recognize that mentors are investing in you because they care about your output and your life. And so think about giving a little bit of that back so that it is more than just a collegial relationship. It's actually more along the lines of a mentee-mentor relationship that can be a little bit deeper. So I'm going to shift gears and give you some very concrete language, because one of the things that irritates me the most is you go to these talks, they're all very high level, and you walk out and you say, okay, but what can I do? So I want to give you some concrete language that I have heard used and that I think may be helpful. Obviously, you can adjust this, but just some ideas. So starting the conversation. I was hoping I could talk with you about my fill in the blank. I would really value your perspective. Might you have some time to talk with me? That's a very different first impression than, hi, I need a mentor. Will you be my mentor? Because as a mentor, that's a little terrifying. So gentle. There needs to be a little bit of a gentle entree. Similarly, there's something along the lines of, I'm thinking about the goals I have for my fill in the blank. And I was wondering if I might talk to you about that. I would love your advice. When someone says to me, I would love your advice, as a human being, you can't help but get a little proud, like, oh, they want to hear what I have to say. And now I am much more inclined to make an hour to meet with them than if I don't have that same sort of warm, fuzzy introduction. So I would definitely think about asking for advice, which is also not nearly as terrifying as somebody saying, I want you to be my mentor and us to communicate for the next 20 years. So then once you're in the door, there's some deepening of the dialogue. From your perspective, what defines a successful student, trainee, mentee, fill in the blank? And honestly, that's a question that I think it's a tough question to answer, but it also gives you insights into the things that that mentor really values. So when you understand what they see as successful, that may give you an indication that this isn't a mentor you really want to work with. And so far, we have not talked about that issue. There may be mentors you meet who are not a good fit for you. So it's actually a good thing to have some of these early meetings where you're feeling out this relationship before you decide, oh, well, Prof. Kusinje said I should be he should be my mentor, so he'll be my mentor. It may not work quite that way. Another direct quote could be something along the lines of, what are some of the common problems that have kept trainees from being successful? And again, that's not only things that you can log in your memory to try to avoid. Those may also be windows into what your mentor has seen happen, and then you're a little tuned into their concerns. Because if they've had a mentee, for example, who never published a paper or took way too long to turn things around, and you hear that, now you better be cued into the fact that that's an issue for them. And you may not want to repeat that if that's your mentor. You want to make sure you stay on top of things. A couple more of these before I turn this back over to Prof. Kolars. Everyone likes to work with mentees differently. Can you tell me what you prefer your mentorship relationships to look like? And that's also a question that I'm sure many mentors have never thought about. What do we like our mentorship relationships to look like? But it's an important question to ask. I know colleagues at the University of Michigan who actually prefer to meet with their students outside of business hours. They'll do brunch on Sundays, for example. I know others who want to make sure that it's within the confines of work and it's never longer than an hour. Those types of things, it's helpful to know up front. And then I love this. Can you tell me things that previous mentees have done that have worked well to promote good mentorship? If your mentor cannot articulate things that you can do to help the relationship, that could be a challenge. And then these last two get to something that Prof. Kolars has mentioned. A little sensitive potentially. I hope you don't mind me asking this question, but can you tell me about your best mentors? What did they do that helped you most? Or what do you wish you'd gotten in terms of mentorship when you were at my career stage? And what you've done here is you're disarming your mentor because you're no longer talking about you. You're asking about them. And you're asking about, you're kind of putting them in the framework of when they were more like you. So let's say your mentor is a big man who's a senior associate dean. You're trying to remind them, okay, when you were a medical student, what do you wish you had? And immediately, as the mentor, it forces you to take a step back and be like, oh, right. Okay, I know I was talking to a medical student, but you're reminding me, right. We're a couple decades different in age, or we're very different in developmental stage in terms of what we know about ourselves. So those types of things can help shift. And it is a good reminder that some of our mentors have not had good mentorship. So there's a little bit of a role here for you to help pull them along, because if you know what good mentorship can look like and what you need out of mentorship, you can help pull that. And this is the last bit. So here's an example. If you, for yourself, write down, my goals are X, Y. Now, again, you may not know them. They may be very specific. My goal is to submit an abstract for such and such a meeting. Or, much more general, I'd really like to improve my analytical skills. But if you write down your goals, that can help you shape your discussion. And if you think about what are the areas that I would most appreciate some guidance, again, maybe it's very specific. This presentation at this meeting versus more general. How do I define my next steps in my career? But if you're conscious of, what do I hope to get out of this mentorship relationship, it can help it be a bit more successful. And then more nitty-gritty, mentoring that would help me the most. Are we talking about meeting once a week? Are we talking about phone calls, face-to-face? Are we talking about content? I really actually want a lot of constructive feedback as I'm doing things. Those issues, as clear as you can be in your own head, understanding a lot of this is still going to be vague, but as clear as you can be in your head, the more likely you are to get it from your mentor. When I think about Elizabeth walking into my office and saying, I want to publish this paper in this journal, I want to publish this paper, I don't know which journal, which one should we use, and I want to submit this grant, I could be very helpful in that situation because she told me exactly what she wanted. If she had walked in and said, I don't know what I want out of my 6 months, which many trainees do, we would have had a very different discussion. So whether it's not knowing what you want or knowing exactly what you want, either way, you can help set up the narrative. That is the last of my section before I hand it back over to Prof. Kolars.
Great, thank you, Professor Moyer. Professor Moyer is one of the most popular mentors in our environment. So just a few final slides as we wrap up and open it up to discussions. So I think the key points that we hope you to take away is there's a lot about defining expectations here in developing a shared work plan. I think the hallmark of successful mentoring is a shared understanding of expectations and responsibilities. And the mentor has more experience in trying to shape that conversation. Trying to do goal setting. In terms of how we're going to be together. Our NIH, for people who are in research training environments in the United States now, has required what's called an individual development plan. So we have to be talking about our trainees in terms of what's their development plan. It's almost like that pediatric growth chart. Where are we helping them grow and how? As you heard from Professor Moyer, start with some exploratory conversations. A lot of people approach mentoring as it's an arranged marriage. Boom, you're together, you're married. So there's a dating process that's involved here where you're scoping each other out, evaluating the chemistry, style. One of the big things, again, I talked about the elephant in the room, time. It is a challenge for all of us. But is somebody respectful enough to schedule appointments and then keep them? Or respectfully reschedule them? Or is it just kind of diffuse out there? So I know there are huge cultural differences when I talk around the world around this issue, but it's something that's really important. And then having next steps honored. A few other key points that I hope you heard in the presentation. The students and the mentees need to take a very, very active role in shaping this. All right, a lot of times people think it's mentoring talks for the mentors. Actually, I think mentees have a larger and a stronger role in making good mentorship happen. Faculty are instrumental at modeling what we've been doing here, some self-reflection. People in leadership set the tone, all right, that should be picked up in the environment. Good mentors emphasize active listening, non-directive facilitation of change, and problem management. We all need mentors. I've underlined the S here because most of us, it's getting very popular to talk about mentoring networks. I have a network of people. I'm 64. I still have a network of mentors that I go to for advice at different parts of the switchback. And also to note, people publish and write papers on this. It's a scholarly space on evaluating mentors, finding out in your own environment. Have you surveyed each other? Do you know who has got mentors, who doesn't, how they define mentorship? Take that first slide about how people talk about mentorship, which ones are important to you. These are things that people write papers on in medical education. What we've tried to do is talk about what is mentorship. Again, this has been from a very U.S. perspective. And a lot of the things that we've talked about may not apply to your culture or environment. there are challenges and opportunities in our environment, may not be here. How do you provide it? How do you get it? Making mentorship happen in your own culture. And again, thank you for allowing Professor Moyer and I to be here. We'd love to get your reactions.